Hi guys, so welcome to our next lesson looking at the Holocaust. Today we're going to look at the liberation of the concentration camps and the end of the period of of the concentration and extermination camps and the atrocities went on there, and then of course the discovery by the Allied forces of these terrible, terrible places. So just before we get started today, we've had a week off, so we want to go back and kind of just think about the things that we covered before the break. So, few questions here. These are just to be thought of things to think about. So I'm going to suggest you pause here and just think about them, be able to answer them yourselves. No need to write it down or anything. Just it's important before we move into looking at liberation that you're, in the mindset of everything that went on beforehand. So think back, what steps were taken to dehumanize Jewish people in Nazi-controlled areas during the 1930s? What were people told was happening in the concentration camps and what was actually happening in them? What was the difference between a concentration and an extermination camp? And other than Jews, who else were sent to the camps? Okay, so I want to suggest, pause here for 3, 4 minutes. Just think back. If there's any of those you're not really sure, look back at the work we did before the break just to make sure you're clear on all of this. Okay, so and the first one there, for what steps? We're looking at Nuremberg laws. We're looking at the wearing of the star. We're looking at the ghettos. We're looking at propaganda again and anti-Semitic propaganda in education. There's a huge amount of stuff we're looking at there. We've covered that a few times. We looked at life in Nazi Germany. We covered it in this unit. Really, really important that you're aware of those steps that the Nazis were able to take in order to manipulate people into dehumanizing the Jewish population. In the camps, people were generally told that people were being sent there to work, that these were work camps, and that people were being sent there in order to make them more productive members of society. Um, what was actually happening is, of course, we know that people were being exterminated. Terrible, terrible conditions. People being treated worse than animals. Worse, it's it's hard to come up with a word that's hard to describe this in terms to do with justice. Absolutely terrible conditions of what was going on in the camps. What was the difference between a concentration and extermination camp? While both of these camps would have had people being murdered, concentration camps did have gas chambers, did have a huge amount of death. Their difference is that an extermination camp, the sole focus of the extermination camp was to kill people. People, we said that when we look at Treblinka, one of the extermination camps, the people lived something around, on average, about 12 hours after their arrival. People aren't living in the extermination camps, most of them, for a long time, but they can live for, a certain amount of time in concentration camps. Some people survive years in concentration camps, just depending on really luck and their work and things like that. Okay. Um, Other than Jews who were sent to the camps, so Roma Gypsies were one of the big groups that were really very harshly affected by this. Political prisoners, LGBT people, and a number of other groups. People who didn't conform to what the Nazis believed was the ideal way of being. Okay, it's important to have those kind of ideas and just have that understanding in your mind when we think about liberation, which we're going to look at today. So today, the purpose of today, we're going to discuss the camps in the context of the war very briefly, and we're going to examine the final days, weeks, and the liberation of the camps. So, the end of the war. Okay, what's going on? So, we've looked at World War II already. We know that the Nazis are forced to fight a war on two fronts, something that Hitler had always wanted to avoid, but he has underestimated the power of the USSR and the struggle of trying to take this land. He really struggles in some of the battles, Battle of Stalingrad. He really struggles to make the progress that he thought he would, and he gets caught and stuck in kind of a stalemate for quite a long time in Russia, whereas he thought he would get through Russia quite quickly. He's then facing Russian winter, and he's facing the power that Stalin has been building up and modernizing in the country in order to be able to defend it. And so, over time, the war in Russia turns against Hitler, and then the Russian forces begin forcing the Nazis back towards Germany, back towards the rest of Europe. We also see then on the Western Front that the Americans become involved in the war after Pearl Harbor. The Americans are now sending huge forces, huge supplies over. We have the D-Day landings, and we have this immense force between the Americans, Canadians, Australians, British, French resistance fighters, all coming together on D-Day and forcing the Nazis back from their Western Front. So we see now kind of a movement in from both sides on the Nazis. We also know that the Nazis are struggling with supplies to an extent, especially with oil and fuel, to keep the war machine going. War is a very costly endeavor, and the Nazis are struggling to keep up with the economic power, as well as the physical force power of the Allies. So they are struggling to keep their war machine running. Now it's just something to note that during all of this, while the Nazis are struggling to keep enough fuel to get the war moving and losing the war, this is one of the factors in why they're losing the war, they are still transporting people to the concentration camps. They're still diverting fuel to trains to transport these people. They're still running the concentration camps. The concentration camps are actually expanding during a lot of this. So huge amounts of resources are going into this concentration camp. This shows the depth of brainwashing that's gone on, and the depth of malice within the people who are organizing this, that even when they're losing a war, they are still putting so much of their resource into an extermination of innocent people. Okay? Now, eventually they do kind of realize that everything starts falling apart, basically, as the Russians come in and advance quite quickly, and the Nazis are kind of concentrating on fighting the Allied forces on the Western Front. So, basically, as this comes along, the SS, they hear word of what's happening. The SS in the concentration camps hear word that the Russians are coming, and they know that if the Russians come and find them, they're going to be in a huge amount of difficulty. They know they can't. The SS running the camps are not organized as an army to fight large battles, and so they begin to realize they have to leave these camps. But what's going on in their minds, it's hard to imagine what's going on, but they don't want to just leave. They can't just up and go for a lot of the time. They need to destroy what they've created. They know that that the Nazis are going to lose the war. It's becoming quite obvious to most people that they're not going to be successful here. And so they begin destroying the evidence of what they've done, so that after the war they don't want to be held accountable to this. So huge burnings of all files. Lots of gas chambers and crematoriums are destroyed so they won't be found, and they start totally getting rid of as much evidence as they can within these camps. On top of this, they start, the people within the camps are evidence of what's gone on, and in order to deal with this, in order to continue the hardships put on these people, they begin something called death marches, and you see a picture of a death march happening there, and that's a real picture of what's happening. And basically, people are taken out of the camp by their hundreds and thousands and marched deeper into Nazi territory. So a lot of these concentration camps are based in Poland, are based on the outskirts of German territory, and they know, so the Russians are going to reach them quite quickly. But the Nazi state is still in existence, so they take these people and they start marching them deeper into the territory. Now, if you imagine this, these people, a lot of them have been living in these terrible, horrible conditions for months, if not years, and they are incredibly weak. They are incredibly malnourished. They have no energy, and they are marched pretty much non-stop for days on end, to the extent that people literally just drop dead during these marches. While they're marching along, people fall and die on the roadside and are simply left there. Right? Their friends, their family, anyone who's around them is forced to march on with the rest and leave these people to die on the roadside. So these death marches are just another aspect of the absolute horrors that went on within the concentration camp, that even when the Nazis are losing the war and there's hope, and there may be some kind of hope inside, maybe some kind of sense that there is liberation is coming, and liberation is coming, but they're not willing to let these people survive. They're going to march them, they're going to kill as many people as they can, they're going to cause as much suffering as they can to these people. And these people are just marched for miles and miles and miles and slowly dropping dead as they go. Right? But for those who are liberated, so some of the camps, people are being left in the camps, especially some of the bigger ones. The SS don't have the power to take all these people out, and they leave a lot of people behind. And as the Allied forces advance, they begin to liberate the different camps. So the first camp that is liberated is Majdanek. My pronunciation of that could be quite poor. Majdanek. It's liberated by the Soviet soldiers back as far as July 1944. So the war was on for up until 8 March. The war in Europe goes up on well into 1945. So we're nearly a year before this, they have the first camps are liberated, and so the world starts to see what has been happening. Okay, for the people who are in the camps, though, this is not this is why it's a hugely joyous occasion, and obviously, this is a brilliant moment for them. It's not an end to their sufferings, and it's actually said that when Auschwitz, which was liberated in January 1945, there were still thousands of prisoners living there. So thousands of people left behind, but they were in such bad condition, they'd been treated so poorly, that 50% of people who were liberated actually didn't survive. They died within a few days of liberation because of the horrible conditions, because they were so weak that there was nothing to be done to save them. So that's just an idea of how desperate these people were, that even with liberation they had been so badly nourished, in such bad condition that they just didn't survive. And so it's very difficult to imagine what these people were going through and what liberation would have meant when you're so weak. Okay? Or for the people who are still losing family even though they've been liberated, the horrors of the Nazi regime still linger on. They're not going to escape. That just because liberation is not enough. For many, then they also face another problem in that they simply don't have anywhere to go. Some people have been here for a long, long period of time. Their land, their homes are gone. Their homes have been taken away. They've lost their whole family. They have nowhere to go. They can't return home because their land has been given away. They can't return home because there's no way to get there. And one of the big issues of the Holocaust afterwards is that there's a huge amount of displacement. People have nowhere to go. People are, lost looking for a home. And we will discuss that a bit more in our next lesson. But it's important to be aware that liberation, while it's of course an amazing thing, and of course something to be celebrated, it is not a magic solution, and the suffering of the people in the concentration camps continues even after it. So basically for today, what I want to do is, there's been 3 questions in the last slide, 3 questions here. I just want you to give me 1 or 2 sentence answers for each of those questions, and you're going to submit them on Teams. There is also a link here, and I'm going to put this link on Teams because you're not going to be able to click it here in this video. This is a link to first-hand accounts of everything I've described today. So there's an account of the destruction of the camps, there's an account of the death marches, and an account of liberation of Auschwitz. So it's really, really interesting. Some sources there to read. There's no questions on them, but I definitely encourage you, if you want to have a good understanding of this, an eyewitness account is going to be much stronger account than what I can give here. So I'm definitely encouraging you, it'll only take 10-15 minutes to read through them, but go and read them and learn from them. It's a very, very interesting topic to read about. Okay, so if any question, guys, just let me know, and thanks for watching.